What's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings sleeper picks for week one. The idea of the sleeper picks is to try to find some guys who are going to be low owned and a little bit under the radar that we still think are in pretty good spots, and people aren't going to be playing them as much as they should. The first sleeper pick we're going to talk about is Peyton Manning at quarterback. Now, I know everybody just cringed when I said that, but think about it here for a second. Baltimore had the best run defense to fantasy running backs last year. They gave up the least amount of points of any team in the league against fantasy running backs. So the path of least resistance against them was throwing the ball. Quarterbacks had the 10th most fantasy points against them, and wide receivers had the 3rd most fantasy points, meaning that if Denver gets down into the red zone, it's going to be tough for them to just hand it to C.J. Anderson and let him run it in the end zone. More likely, they're going to have to throw the ball. And I think with Peyton Manning to Demaryius Thomas on the outside, they're going to be able to hook up for a couple touchdown passes here against a defense that basically the path of least resistance is to throw the ball against them. So I think that Peyton Manning, if you think about it, he was still the 4th highest average points at the quarterback position last year, even though he had a horrible end to the season. That means when he was feeling good at the beginning of the season and he was healthy, he was throwing 3 or 4 touchdown passes a game, 250, 300 yards. So it's not that crazy to think that one of the best quarterbacks we've seen in our lifetime could have a big game on week one in a pretty good situation. Moving on to the running back position, there's 2 guys I want to mention. The first guy is Doug Martin. Doug Martin is the running back for Tampa Bay. He goes up against the Tennessee Titans, who had allowed the 2nd most points to fantasy running backs of anybody in the league. Martin seems to be completely healthy from his injuries. He looked great so far in the preseason, and Tampa Bay is favored to win this game. With a rookie quarterback in Jameis Winston back there, you're going to think they're going to want to protect it and make it as easy as they can for his first NFL game. Therefore, I think you're going to see a big dose of Doug Martin here today. And he also is a guy who's a 3-down back. He's somebody who, even in passing situations, will go out there and catch a few passes to add on to his score. On a site like DraftKings, where we have some, PPR, you want to make sure that, you have a running back who also is a guy who's going to be in there on 3rd down. So a 3-down running back like Doug Martin at a price of only $4,500 is definitely someone you want to look at for your rosters. Another guy who we think is a little bit of a sleeper pick is DeMarco Murray from the Philadelphia Eagles. I know most people are expecting this to be a split, and I don't think he's going to be the sole running back, but I do think he's going to get the lion's share of the carries. If you look back to last season, even though LaShawn McCoy wasn't playing all that great, he was still getting 20 to 25 carries and winding up with 100 yards. I think DeMarco Murray is a much better back than LaShawn McCoy was at this stage of their careers. So I think that if you give 20 to 25 carries to Murray, he's going to give you a good return. Now, the other thing I really like about Murray is last year, Atlanta was one of the worst teams in the league with giving up opposing running backs fantasy points. And a big reason for that is it was very easy to run the ball against Atlanta when you got into the red zone. So if they get into the red zone today, again, the path of least resistance is for them to run the ball. And the guy who I think is going to be the one inside the 20 who's going to be doing all that running is DeMarco Murray. There's a good chance that he could pick up multiple touchdowns in this high-scoring game. This is the highest over-under on the week at 56, and I think that more people are talking about guys like Bradford and guys like Jordan Matthews on the outside, and I think they're forgetting about the fact that Murray was one of the best running backs in the league and pretty much led the league in rushing for most of the season last year. So I think that DeMarco Murray at only $6,700 here on DraftKings is a little bit underpriced and is still flying under the radar. So not only are you getting a little bit of a price break on him, but you're also getting a guy who should have some low ownership. Moving on to the wide receiver position, there's 2 guys we're going to mention. And the first one is somebody who I think you already know about from my quarterback choice. If you think about and ask people, rank these 4 receivers this week for week 1 NFL. Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, Dez Bryant, and Demaryius Thomas. I think most people are going to gravitate towards the other 3 guys because you have Julio Jones in the highest over-under game, and then you have Odell Beckham and Dez Bryant going up against each other in a game that has a 51-point over-under as well. That means that if you're looking to spend up at the top, the guy who gets forgotten in that group is Demaryius Thomas. Now, we just went over the fact that, Baltimore had given up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers last year, and they're really tough to run on. So if C.J. Anderson is not going to be able to get into the end zone, how else are they going to be able to score? I think it's going to be some pass plays, and when you get down to the red zone, you're going to throw it up to your big, tall, athletic receiver, and I think that Peyton Manning hooking up with Demaryius Thomas is going to happen more than once for a touchdown. And I think that people who were sleeping on it are going to be really upset when they spend a lot of money on guys like Julio and guys like Odell Beckham, who are going to be very, very highly owned in all these tournaments. A cheap option who I really like is a guy like Stevie Johnson. Now, Stevie Johnson, basically for the same reason that we were talking about here with Denver. Detroit has a very good run defense, so I don't think that San Diego is going to be able to run the ball in the end zone when they get down there close. I think they're going to wind up having to pass. And basically, Stevie Johnson has been playing almost splitting reps at the position that Keenan Allen was in last year. Allen was a huge PPR monster down the stretch last year because he was getting so many targets. And they kind of wanted to lessen his workload a little. So they've been working Stevie Johnson in a little bit, running those same kind of routes. I know that Evan Silver of Roto World tweeted out something earlier this week that if he is in the slot, he's going to be going up against Josh Wilson. Josh Wilson's been a guy who's gotten torched for the last couple of years. So when Evan speaks, I definitely listen. And if he thinks this is a good matchup as well, I think you're going to have some sneaky upside here. San Diego should be throwing the ball a pretty good amount because it's going to be tough for them to run against that Detroit defense. So I think that Stevie Johnson has a chance to pick up a bunch of catches here. He's only 3,700. So if he gets you 5 catches for 50 or 60 yards and winds up with a touchdown, he's going to be one of the best value plays that we have on the day. And I still think that people aren't really looking down there at him. So I think you're going to get him at a pretty decently low ownership, although I think that a lot of the sharp players are on him at this point. So if you're playing in some of the higher buy-ins, he might be a little higher owned than you would expect. I also think that Davante Adams is going to be somebody who draws a lot of attention in that low price wide receiver range. So I think if you can find another guy to go to, like maybe a Stevie Johnson or, a John Brown, if Michael Floyd isn't playing in Arizona, I think that those guys have a chance to give you a big leg up on the competition because Davante is going to be highly owned. And these guys would be the sleeper picks to go away from him. At the tight end spot, there's somebody who I was really surprised when I was looking at the numbers. You got to figure that the guys up towards the top, like the Bennetts and the Olsons, are going to be pretty highly owned. You also got to think guys like maybe a Jordan Cameron or a Richard Rodgers on the low end are going to have some decent ownership. A guy who I like that's only 2,700 is Michael Rivera. Last year when he was playing for Oakland, he actually finished 7th in targets overall for tight ends. He did have a couple big games where he had multiple catches. He had a 100-yard game as well. So he's somebody who has flashed the upside that we don't normally see from the tight end position. A lot of times the problem with tight ends is they're very touchdown dependent. They only see 3 or 4 targets a game. 1 or 2 of them might be in the red zone. And if they don't get you that touchdown, they could finish with like 2 catches for 25 yards. Rivera doesn't really have that problem. He's somebody who has been targeted enough where he can get you 5 or 6 catches, even if he doesn't get in the end zone, with 50 or 60 yards and pay off a salary of only 2,700. I think Oakland is going to be trailing Cincinnati in this game, so they're going to have to pass. And that Cincinnati defense is pretty good, even on the outside as well. So I think you're going to have to try to, look a little bit more towards the inside, towards the backs to get some of those, cheap yards and keep the chains moving in order to get some yardage and get close to the end zone late in the game when they're trying to pass. So I think that Rivera is somebody who I really like and could be a really sneaky option at low ownership. Finally, moving on to defense. I don't understand this, but I think some people just don't look at the numbers. I think the Philly defense is going completely under talked about. I hear people talking about Julio Jones. I hear people talking about Matt Ryan, Tevin Coleman. I really like this Philly defense. Not only have they played much better in the preseason this year, but they were actually the highest scoring fantasy defense last year. Now, I think people get a little bit too caught up in how many points they allow. How many points they allow is only one component of how your fantasy score is calculated. They're a team that gets a lot of sacks. They run a lot of plays. The teams running against them run a lot of plays. They get a lot of turnovers. They get a lot of picks. And I think in this game, there's a good chance that they can get all those things. They also have a really good return game, so they can get you some points in the return game as well. And this is a defense that's very opportunistic. They try to get those fumbles. They try to get those interceptions, and they try to run them back for touchdowns. They try to get to the house with them. So I think that at 2,700, you're basically getting the defense that last year was the highest scoring fantasy defense. You're right, and I agree with you. They might give up 28 to 35 points this game, but I don't really care how many real-life points they give up. I care how many fantasy points they get me. I think they're going to get me 4 or 5 sacks this game. I think they're going to get me a turnover or 2, and I think they're one of the teams that has a really good chance of scoring a touchdown. So if they can do all those things for me, they're going to get me a lot of fantasy points. And even if they give up 28 or 35 real life points, they're still going to get me double-digit fantasy points and be a really good roster on the day. So that sums up our sleeper picks for DraftKings for the first week of the season for NFL. There'll be a write-up that goes along with this that's coming along later, but I wanted to make sure I got this out to you guys because I know people are starting to put their rosters together for Thursday and getting really excited. We're basically about a day and a half away from kickoff, so make sure you get over there. If you haven't signed up yet, make sure you come over and sign up at RotoCurve. We'll be bringing you some good NFL information all season long to help you win in your daily fantasy games. So thank you guys for joining us. And as always, stay classy, DFS.